Hey guys, Tyler Berger here with Bass Fishing HQ. Today I want to talk about winter bass fishing. Winter bass fishing can be some of the most difficult bass fishing you will experience all year long. And that's mostly because of the conditions that you will be facing. Cold, blistery winds, cold water, and things like that make winter bass fishing a little bit difficult. However, winter can be one of the best times of the year to catch the biggest bass in the lake. This is a time when the biggest bass are susceptible to being caught, and the best part is that a lot of guys are not fishing this time of the year. They are staying home and they are staying warm, which I understand, but at the same time, you could be out catching big bass with nobody else around you. What gets better than that? Before we get too far into wintertime bass fishing, there are a few key things that you need to remember when it comes to winter bass fishing. The first thing is that as the water temperatures cool and as they get extremely cold, a bass's metabolism is also going to slow. This means that a bass does not need to eat as much food on a day-to-day or even week-to-week basis as it does during the summer. So, although a lot of people think that bass may not be able to be caught during the winter, this is just not true. The fact is that bass simply are eating less during the winter because they don't need to eat a whole lot. They can eat a bluegill or a crawfish and it will maintain their bodies for a longer period of time than during the summer when the water temperature is high and their metabolism is super fast. The other thing to keep in mind is that bass like to have deep water close by during the winter. Now, deep is relative depending on what lake, river, stream, or pond that you are fishing. Some places deep may be 7 or 8 feet, and other places deep may be 40, 50, 60, 70 foot deep. So keep that in mind. Before we get any further, let's define what winter bass fishing actually is. I'm going to define winter bass fishing as water temperatures below 50 degrees. And this is typically going to happen during December, January, and February. Now, if you live down south, your waters may actually not ever get below 50 degrees. And up north, your water temperatures are obviously going to be freezing, as many of the lakes during this time of the year are actually frozen. Even though these lakes may be frozen, you can actually still catch bass through the ice during the winter if you can withstand the cold. So let's look at the general movement of wintertime bass. During the late fall, as the water continues to cool and get extremely cold, bass are going to start to move from the backs of creeks where they may have been chasing bait during the fall, and they're going to start making their way out to the main lake. The main lake is one of the biggest places that bass are going to be found during winter. As they make their way to the main lake, bass are going to choose migration routes to get out to the main lake. In a lot of lakes and reservoirs across the nation, a migration route is simply a creek channel. Bass will follow creek channels from the backs of creeks all the way out to the main lake. Sometimes bass will stop in certain areas along the way and continue to feed. This may be creek channel bends. This may be secondary creeks that are also close to the main creek channel, or even something as simple as a big laydown that extends out into the creek channel. In more natural lakes, like lakes that you will find in Florida, bass are going to typically follow grass lines out to the main lake where they might winter in deep grass. One of the most important things to know is that the majority of the bass are probably going to be found on the main lake during the winter. But not all bass are going to be on the main lake. As long as there's good depth in major creek arms, bass will stay in some of these creek arms throughout the entire winter. As bass start to leave their fall feeding areas, which is typically in major creek arms, they're going to follow migration routes or highways out to the main lake where they will winter. Now, along the way, they're going to stop at little locations that we call staging areas. These are areas that they hit right before they get to the main lake. Now, typically when we think about staging areas, we think about when bass move from deep water to shallow water in the spring. Now, some of these areas are going to be the same, but in this case, the bass are moving from shallow water to deep water, going from fall to winter. Now again, when you're fishing during the winter, one of the biggest keys to winter bass fishing is making sure that there's always deep water close by. So one of the first places that you're going to want to check as fish are moving from the creeks to the main lake is actually on the creek channel swings that are located in that creek arm. Bass are going to use creek channels just like major highways as they go from the creeks to the main lake. And some bass will even stay in those creek channels throughout the entire winter. Now, creek channels can extend for a long time in a creek, so finding something to break up the creek channel is really key into locating the bass, some sort of irregularity in the creek channel. So if the creek channel swings along the bank and touches the bank and there's a big laydown right there, that can be a great place to catch a bass during the winter. Also, secondary points, wherever they come out in a creek and touch the creek channel, is another great place to catch wintertime bass. Also, any type of isolated cover like big laydowns or docks that are actually right next to the creek channel, these are areas where bass can be caught during the winter. It's also important to know that as winter moves on, a lot of bass are going to move to the main lake, but some will remain in those smaller creek channels. And sometimes they can be located actually in the middle of the creek channel on brush piles or rock piles that might be in the center of those creek channels. Guys, and real quick, before we get into any more of the video, I want you guys to just go check out ColumbusBarrelCo.com. I'm leaving a link in the description and you can get awesome hats. Check out this bass hat. This is an actual piece of bourbon barrel wood that's on this hat. How cool is that, right? I'm gonna leave a link in the description. If you use the coupon code BASS25, that's BASS25, you're gonna get 25% off an awesome hat like this. Link is in the description, check it out. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the video. So as fish continue to move on to the main lake, there's a few key wintertime areas that you wanna look for to catch these bass. One of the best areas to catch bass during the winter is any kind of bluff on the main lake. A bluff basically signals a place where the main river channel touches the bank, and that is how the bluff is formed. These are areas that are extremely steep and they drop off into deep water very, very close by. The thing that bass love about bluffs is that they can move up and down easily in the water column, no matter if it gets warm one day during the winter or it gets really, really cold. They don't have to move that far, they can just move up and down vertically. Another great thing about a bluff is that bass can get out of any kind of current that may be coming down the lake, because there are a lot of irregularities and rock little points and little rock coves that are all in bluffs that bass can tuck out of the way and get out of the current. One of the biggest things to locating bass on bluffs is really trying to locate irregularities on a bluff. A bluff can extend for miles, and just like a creek channel in a creek, any kind of irregularity that you find in a bluff is more than likely going to hold bass. Now, irregularities can come in the form of lay down trees, but it can also come in the form as areas where there's a shelf on the bluff, or maybe a point is created in the bluff, a small point, or maybe it's an indent in the bluff. Some sort of irregularity is really going to help attract bass on a bluff to a certain area. So before you even start fishing, you can idle up and down a bluff, scanning it, or just simply looking at the bluff and find these type of irregularities that you can then go back and fish. Another key area to fish during the winter is any type of main lake structure that is near the main river channel. This can include long points that extend out into the lake that have rock and brush near them. These points will typically drop off into the main river, and right there is typically where you're going to find fish during the winter. Another great area is any kind of hump that is close to the main river channel. Again, one of the biggest keys is having a piece of cover on top of that structure, such as a brush pile or rock. An overlooked area that a lot of people don't look for wintertime bass is actually in depressions and holes that are on main lake flats. If you can remember back a few years ago, there was a Bassmaster Elite Series on Cherokee Lake where a lot of the leaders were targeting depressions and holes in deep flats to find bunches of smallmouth that were grouped up close together. They were using things like Damiki rigs and drop shots and spoons to be able to catch these fish in the depressions. Although we have talked about many areas where you can locate bass during the winter, one of the most important ingredients in catching bass during the winter is finding areas that have rock. If you think of some of the areas we've listed above, like creek channel swings and bluffs and main river points and humps, these are all areas that typically have a lot of rock on them. And this time of the year, rock is even more important than normal because rock is an area that bass use to not only feed, but they can also get warmth from the rock on sunny days. It's really important to know that although we're talking about finding bass in the winter by using creek channels and main river channels, the fact is that just because you're targeting these creek channels doesn't necessarily mean that the bass are going to be deep. On warm and sunny days during the winter, almost no matter how cold the water temperatures are, shallow water rocks are going to warm up. And if you can find these shallow water rocks, maybe in 10 foot or less, bass are going to be relating to them, again, as long as you have deep water close by. So it's very important to know that although we're talking about creek channels and river channels, bass aren't always necessarily extremely deep in the winter, although again, they will be relating to these creek channels. If you guys enjoyed this type of video, please give me a thumbs up and please subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you guys in the next video.